Hello, I'm still not Corey, and I still have ADHD, and that's exactly what this video is gonna be about. I guess. Before we get started in the video though, my question for you is this: do you have ADHD? Let me know in the comments below, please. So if you have TikTok, you might have seen this thing happening recently where people were talking about something called time blindness, and I could explain what it is, and I will, but first I want to show you the video that kind of kicked all of this off.
So I just got yelled at for asking a very reasonable question. So I'm applying to go somewhere, and I just wanted to know, are there accommodations for people who struggle with time blindness and being on time? And then the person I was with, when we were done, they actually started yelling at me and saying that accommodations for time blindness doesn't exist, and if you struggle with being on time, you'll never be able to get a job. And then they're like, your stupid generation wants to destroy the workplace. And yeah, I think that a culture where workers are just cut off because they struggle with being on time, when there's other solutions that we can look to, I think that just anybody who thinks it's okay to just treat people like that, yeah, that culture needs to be dismantled.
So I've cut it down just a little bit, but it's also linked in the description if you want to watch the whole thing or give that creator some love or whatever. Anyway, let's talk about it. Time blindness, what is it? So broadly, it's kind of the reason that people with ADHD are often late. Time blindness, it's not something that's strictly, you know, within the diagnostic criteria of ADHD. It is something that people with ADHD kind of talk about and discuss and experience, but it's not, you know, strictly, if you have time blindness, you have ADHD. It's just a way that we describe something that happens with people with ADHD. Anyway, that doesn't kind of explain what it is, so I'll do my best to summarize it here. Basically, it's struggling with the perception of time. You might overestimate time or underestimate time. That's how much time has passed, or how much time an activity might take, or how far away in the future something is. Like, for example, if something is 2 weeks away, that is forever. That's so far in the future. What? That's not gonna happen anytime soon. And then 2 weeks pass and you're like, oh, the thing is here now. The deadline or the bill I had to pay, that's here now. And a lot of the decisions you make are based around time, right? You've got activities you need to slot into certain times, you've got responsibilities. If you've got a job, you need to be there on time, you need to get home and do things. Like even cooking, right? You know, cooking is something where you need to estimate how long things are going to take. And if you can't sort of intuitively do that sometimes, it can make a lot of things really difficult. So a lot of people will think time blindness is just, you know, showing up late. And that is something that can happen. People can show up late or alternatively show up super early because they're so worried about being late. Like, it's not just that. It can affect every facet of your life, and it's not just, you know, a case of being rude to other people. So in a nutshell, time blindness is just a difficulty or inability to sense or estimate the passing of time. And that's kind of a key point there. It's not about just, you know, ignoring time passing intentionally. It's more about a difficulty actually sensing it. It's not a voluntary thing. It's not, oh, that doesn't matter. It doesn't feel the same way that it might feel to other people. Like 5 hours could go by like that without you even noticing. 5 minutes could go by in the same length of time. It's a really, really difficult thing to explain to other people if they don't have that kind of experience. And bear in mind, as with many things, you may experience this occasionally, right? You may experience, oh man, those 5 hours just flew by. Yeah, that's a normal thing. But every single day of your life, with every single activity, that's a less normal thing, and that's something that's pretty exclusive to people with ADHD and other, you know, disorders or disabilities. I'm sure the responses to this were very lovely, as they always are when people talk about difficulties they have because of ADHD.
Hi there. Before I start this job, I just wanted to let you know that I show up late for everything, and I have not done anything to fix that or to better that problem. I was just wondering if you could accommodate me and make it someone else's problem so that I don't have to be penalized for it. Thank you.
Okay, bear in mind, don't send any hate to this creator, don't even send anything to them. Just ignore their existence from this point forwards. Pretend you don't know who they are, right? The point is that people respond to things like that. People see a lot of the outcomes of ADHD as being rude, like a difficulty to pay attention, a difficulty to sort of sense time passing, a difficulty to sometimes control impulses, you know, interrupting people and things. A lot of these things are just seen as outright rude, and it's really difficult having ADHD and having all of these sort of characteristic outcomes of your disorder just being perceived as rude by general society. And a lot of people don't seem to understand that, hey, I have a thing that is making it harder for me to not do these things. We're not on the same level here. You not being rude by not interrupting or showing up on time or all of these sorts of things is not the same as me doing that, because I literally have a disability that makes it more difficult to achieve that sort of level of normalcy. And again, don't target this creator, because tons of people said it. It wasn't just them. I chose that as an example because it was one of the first ones that came up, and the phrasing of it is kind of interesting to me. You know, it's saying, oh, I haven't done anything to solve this, and it's really making it about personal responsibility. And I would have chosen another TikTok from someone whose videos I usually quite enjoy that I commented on, because I thought they had it so wrong, but the video seems to have disappeared, so hopefully they saw the people saying, hey, this is kind of ableist, and decided to take it down. But essentially they were talking about personal responsibility. They said, hey, come here, listen here. Here's the thing. You're not going to get accommodations for things, but here's something that's going to help you throughout your whole life. Personal responsibility. And I remember commenting on that and being like, yeah, personal responsibility isn't really going to help when you can't really control it, or you can't control it as well as other people. The thing is that you can put as much effort as you want into doing all these things, and maybe sometimes still mostly be on time, but the effort that takes is astronomical. Anyway, we'll get to that in a sec. I want to talk a little bit about the response to this, because again, it's ignoring that ADHD is a disability, right? If you say, I haven't put the work into doing this, you haven't put the work into being on time, you haven't put the work into, basically meeting these expectations, and so you want to, just give it over to someone else. So you want to inconvenience someone else because you're not willing to put in the work. And I think that's a really callous way of viewing it, because ultimately, you don't know that these people haven't put in the work. Like, people with ADHD probably are very much trying to put in the work, and it's so much harder than you even understand. And it comes down to ADHD not really being seen as a disability, right? Whenever you tell people generally about ADHD, they kind of write it off as, oh, that's the thing that makes kids hyper, or, oh, that's a fake thing, or you just want to get by on being lazy. And the issue is that, like, people with ADHD, I mean, most of the people that I know with ADHD aren't lazy. It just takes so much work to just do normal things. I've spoken to other people about this. I think I've spoken about this on my podcast, Sci Guys, which you can check out. Ooh. But seriously, I've spoken about this before, wherein brushing your teeth even, right? Most people can see brushing their teeth as a pretty easy habit, right? With ADHD, it can be harder to form habits. Like, I genuinely need to consciously make myself do every single step of brushing my teeth every single day. Just that one thing alone is kind of exhausting, right? You don't really understand how many things you're doing on autopilot until, you actually have to sit and write out all the things you do in a day. Try doing that, right? Think about every single thing you do in a day, right? Let's say your morning routine. Say you get up out of bed. First off, getting out of bed can be really difficult. I know a lot of people struggle with getting out of bed, but with ADHD, it can be kind of different. For example, right? I can be lying in bed. I can be thinking, I want to get up. Not just I need to get up. I want to get up, but I'm not able to. I can't make that thought, that feeling of wanting to get up in my head, actually physically result in me getting out of bed. There is some barrier in the way sometimes, and I can't explain it much better than that. It's just executive dysfunction. It is difficult to carry out a task even though I want to do it. I am raging against my body saying, get up, get up, get up. And sometimes I just can't. I find it really bloody difficult to do that, right? So first off, getting up and getting out of bed. A very, very easy thing, but difficult for people with ADHD sometimes, right? So let's say you go to shower, right? Showering involves getting undressed, turning on the shower, getting in the shower, washing yourself, which is a number of different steps. You've got to wash your hair, you've got to wash your body, you might use conditioner, you might use some kind of facial stuff, right? There's lots of different steps to having a shower, and you do it all by habit, but people with ADHD might not be able to do that quite as easily as you. So already, just getting up, getting dressed, and then going to brush your teeth, which is, getting the toothbrush, getting the toothpaste on it, staying focused for 2 minutes to brush your teeth, which if it's an uncomfortable or unenjoyable task is so bloody difficult. Like, ask someone with ADHD how difficult it is to do something that is boring, that isn't, like, exciting, and I promise you, it's harder than you think. Yes, everyone struggles doing things that are boring, but the entire point of ADHD is that it's a disorder, right? It's a disorder. These things can be harder for people with this disability. That is the entire point, and that's what people seem to be missing. They think, oh, well, I find this thing difficult sometimes too, but I just get over it. Sure, okay, yeah, you might find it difficult to walk up a flight of stairs every now and then too, but you're not going to tell someone in a wheelchair or with crutches, just get over it. I find it difficult sometimes too, because you can see a physical thing there. You can physically see something that differentiates your ability from their ability. People with ADHD don't really have that. There's no physical, visible difference there, and so people find it harder to empathize, I think, which is why you get responses like this, where someone says, I have a disability that makes it really difficult for me to do this thing, and all I need is just some accommodations so that I'm not constantly having to put in maximum effort, more than all of my peers, just to meet just normal, or maybe even just below normal. And I don't want to be penalized for putting in maximum effort, as much effort as I possibly can, and still not making it sometimes because I'm disabled. That's the entire point, right? But people don't seem to understand that. People seem to think that being late is always a choice. But with ADHD, it sometimes isn't. And that's the entire crux of this thing there. That it's a disorder, it's a disability, and you cannot just expect people to meet all expectations when they have a disability that makes those expectations difficult to meet. Hello, just popping in to let you know I've got some brand new merch if you want to check that out, specifically for people with ADHD. We've got some t-shirts, we've got some patches, you can get them all at normalcitizen.store. It's pretty cool. You'll be helping me out, you'll be helping out the channel, and you can tell people to be interesting, as an accommodation for your ADHD. Go and check that out. Also check out my Patreon, please. Okay, thank you. Let's get back to the video. No amount of personal responsibility is going to make you not have ADHD. Okay? And expecting people with disabilities to put in more and more and more effort instead of everyone else just kind of being like, hey, these people are disabled. Maybe we should, do our bit to help, right? Maybe we should all carry the burden because no one chooses to be disabled, right? No one chooses to have ADHD. And so maybe it's better as a society if we support those people who can't quite meet the things that everyone else is able to do. Right? That would be a better society, a more equitable society, rather than expecting people who find it incredibly difficult to do this thing to constantly do this thing. And I get what people are probably thinking, right? I get it. Being late makes things difficult for other people. It can be inconvenient. It can make more work for other people. I understand that. But that's what a disability does. That is the outcome of a disability. And yes, you do need to have some level of personal responsibility. You can't just write it off as being like, oh, well, I have ADHD, so I'm not going to try. But I don't think many people actually do that. There is a lot of trying, and sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you might not get there. And there are going to be some people with ADHD, probably in the comments of this video, saying, I have ADHD and I don't find that difficult. Yeah, because you're not the same as every other person that has ADHD. We all have different experiences. We all struggle differently with different things. You might not find that particularly difficult personally. You might not feel that thing as intensely as someone else does, but you both still have ADHD. And if you have a disability and you spend your time just shouting down other people with that disability because your experience differs from them, you suck, my guy. That's not a cool thing to do at all. We should be working together and understanding that because we're all individuals and not every presentation of a disability is exactly the same, that your experience being different from someone else's doesn't undermine theirs. But let's bring this back to time blindness more specifically, because I think there's a problem in the way that this sort of discourse, if you will, is viewing the problem, right? Because we're not really talking about time blindness, we're talking about being late. And being late and time blindness are related, but they're not the same thing. It's not a one-to-one. Yes, time blindness can result in people being late, but as I said at the top, it can also result in people being early because they're so stressed about being late, and they're so early because they can't gauge that time. But what we're doing here is not focusing on the root problem itself, we're focusing on what is inconvenient for other people. Which I think is kind of a problem when we're talking about a disability and your only way of viewing it is how it inconveniences you. You're kind of missing the entire point of it there, right? Because if we look at time blindness as a whole, this becomes far more understandable. Yes, I can definitely see how someone being late all the time, you can just look at that and be like, hey, just don't be late. We shouldn't make accommodations for you being late, because if I was late every single day, I wouldn't expect accommodations. I would just try harder to get up earlier. But that just shows a misunderstanding of time blindness, right? We need to think about it as it is, because it isn't just being late. It's a difficulty with gauging time. I think there's a lot of backlash to this because people don't understand how this actually results in people being late. They think it's just sitting and not actually caring enough about showing up on time. But in reality, it could be very, very different. So here are just a couple of examples. Bear in mind, these are just a couple of examples. There are plenty more ways that this can affect people. So let's say you've got maybe 10 minutes before you need to leave, right? And someone says to you, you've got 10 minutes before you need to go. Make sure you're ready to leave in 10 minutes. And you're like, okay, cool, 10 minutes to go. That is fine. I can definitely get ready in 10 minutes. Okay, get my shirt on, get my jeans on, cool, great. Oh no, I need to brush my teeth. All right, brushing my teeth, good. Oh, I need to do my hair actually now that I'm looking in the mirror. Okay, right, I've done my hair, very good. Oh wait, where's my wallet? I'm gonna need my wallet. Okay, where did I put that? I can't quite remember. Oh, there it is. I found it. Okay, but now I need to get my keys. And wait, my keys aren't where I'm normally supposed to leave them. Where could they have gone? Oh, there they are. I found them because that's where I put them down when I went to pick up my wallet. Okay, great. Now, where's my phone? I left it charging. Okay, so it's charging there. Oh, actually, it's on low battery. And I've still got a few minutes left, so I'll put my phone back on charge. Oh, wait, we're about to go out the door. Oh, damn it. Hold on. I left my phone back inside. And wait a second. I've not done my shoes. There's so many things you can just forget, right? This is the thing. With ADHD, there are things that are difficult to remember. If something isn't in front of your face, sometimes it can be really bloody difficult to remember that thing is there or where it is. And you could say, oh, we'll just put things down in the same place every single time. I have that. I have a place where I'm supposed to put things, but sometimes I can thoughtlessly put it somewhere else without really thinking. And that then can make it really difficult to be on time if I'm suddenly looking for everything I need. And you could say, oh, we should just be more prepared. You should just find where everything is and make sure you've got it all together before you're even getting ready to go. And yes, that is a potential thing that one could do. But again, you're kind of misunderstanding ADHD there as well, right? Like, it's not easy to remember these things unless they're in front of your face. You can say, oh, well, write a notes app. Make sure you've got a checklist of notes to do. Yeah, sure. I might forget to check that notes page every single time I go out, right? It's really hard to form habits. It's really hard to remember to check something. What people tend to do is provide solutions that depend on remembering something or depend on something that people with ADHD still find difficulty with. It's kind of ridiculous. But another example, let's say someone comes to you and says, okay, you've got 20 minutes before you need to leave, and you're doing something at that time. You know, maybe you're playing a game or you're doing a little bit of work, right? You're just finishing off some work before you go out for the evening. And you think, okay, well, it takes me maybe 10-ish minutes to get ready. I know that to be safe. I'll give myself 15 minutes, and I'm doing this thing right now, so we'll do that for the next 5 minutes, then I'll go off and I'll get ready for, 15 minutes and be ready to leave on time. Fantastic, great. So you keep doing your work for 5 minutes, and suddenly 25 minutes has gone by, you haven't quite realized it, and you're like, damn it, now I'm going to be late. And you could just say, oh, well, set an alarm. That also doesn't work. And I'll get into why that is in just a second. But these are just like two ways that this could be a problem, right? It's not just choosing to be late. It's not having that ability to gauge time quite as well, or not being able to remember all the things that you're going to need to do before you leave the house, and so then you end up being late because you've not gauged how long it takes to perform a certain task. I can understand why that's frustrating for people that someone can show up late all the time, but can you understand that it's frustrating to be in a position of trying to be on time and then being late? And pretty much the only solution to that is being incredibly early. There's kind of two groups of people with ADHD, it seems. There's the people that are stressfully early and the people that are like consistently late. And there's some people that swing between those two things. Because it's really difficult to gauge time, you can end up being early. You may say, oh, that's preferable because you're not putting on all the people around you. Sure. But that still comes with its own difficulties, right? You're taking up so much more of your own time. You're so stressed about getting there on time. And sometimes that's not always super possible if you've got other things going on in the day. It just makes life a lot more difficult for you specifically. And I get that. You have a disability. But ultimately, if you know someone that's disabled, you should be maybe a little bit more lenient on that, right? I'm not saying you should expect people to be late every single time you see them, or be absolutely okay with it, or be fine when they're late for something that's super important that they're on time for. My point is, maybe just have a little bit of compassion there, because trying really, really hard to be on time all the time is difficult. And your only other option is being really, really early, which takes about the same amount of stress. And the only difference is that it doesn't inconvenience anyone else around you, but it makes your life that much harder as well. And to be honest, in some cases, it's not super tenable. And when I say that, what I mean is that this constant output of energy to be on time or early or to not be late all the time takes a massive toll. It is exhausting. And like I was saying earlier, with that list of things you got to do when you get up in the morning, that really simple task for someone could be so bloody exhausting for someone with ADHD if they've got to try and be on time for work. Like, let's say in the office, every single day at bang on 9 a.m, no room for leeway. That is a truly exhausting thing to do. And to be honest, in an office, that rarely benefits the people that you're working with all that much. I worked in an office for a bit, and I would show up pretty consistently between 9 a.m. and 9:15. That 15-minute window was roughly when I showed up, right? And I got a lot of work done in the day. That 15-minute window, whether I showed up at, like, maybe even 5 to 9 sometimes. If I showed up at 5 to 9 or 9:15, that would not affect the amount of work I got done in that day. And it really bothered me that that was seen as a sign of, oh, you're not committed to this role because you're not here at bang on 9 a.m. every single day, despite the fact that you're getting the same amount of work done regardless of when you show up, and despite the fact that pretty much everyone else in the office, even if they showed up at 9 or 5 to 9 or whatever, they wouldn't start working until past, because they would get in, they would have their breakfast for like 15 to 30 minutes, and then they'd get started. So whether I showed up at 9 a.m. or 9:15, it didn't really make a difference, because ultimately, I was getting started before people anyway. It's so frustrating that we place so much worth on things that don't actually matter all that much. And yes, there are cases where being on time does matter, but there are different accommodations for that. So let's say you're working in service and you've got to get to your shift for someone to leave their shift. You could say that's important, absolutely. But also, maybe that's an issue of poor planning there, right? Where it's one in, one out like that. You could be on management to maybe figure out a way that's slightly more beneficial, that gives a little bit more leeway, where someone finishes a little bit later and someone starts a little bit earlier, and then you've got that little buffer zone of someone being late. There you go. Problem pretty much solved, right? But before I get into actual accommodations, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the solutions that people seem to be giving, because people say, why don't you just set an alarm? I mentioned that earlier. Why don't you just set an alarm? Because here's the thing. I can set an alarm and almost on autopilot, I can turn it off and kind of not do anything. Setting an alarm is something that seems easy, but again, this is a disability, so it's not necessarily going to be as easy as you think. Because to set an alarm, first off, you need to remember to set an alarm, which, hey, ADHD can make memory kind of a difficult thing to deal with. So you've got to remember to set an alarm, right? But let's say you've got alarms set, consistently all the time. You just got them standard programmed into your phone so they go off at the same time every day. Let's forget the fact that that might not actually solve the problems of being late for social situations or for people whose jobs are different hours every day, right? That's not going to solve every problem, but let's pretend that it does. So you've got alarms that are going off on the same time every single day. You don't need to remember to set them off, right? But you do need to remember to turn them off and then do the thing that you're supposed to be doing. But here's the thing with ADHD, it can be difficult to switch from one task to another. If you're engrossed in something, you can find it difficult to switch your attention from that thing to a different thing. So for example, if I'm sat there working and an alarm goes off, I'm like, okay, cool, the alarm's gone off, nice. I need to start getting ready, so I'll just finish what I'm doing here for a second, and then I'll go and get ready, right? Because it's not super reasonable if you're working or writing something or, doing something to just stand up and immediately go and do the other thing. That's not what people tend to do, right? And it's not a super easy thing to do to shift your focus from one thing to another. So you think, okay, well, I'll finish this sentence, and then I'll get up. So you finish that sentence, and then you start another sentence, and then you keep on going, and you've already forgotten that the alarm has gone off. I need to sometimes check multiple times when I've set an alarm for my food. If I've got something in the oven, I will have to check 3 or 4 times during the course of that alarm to make sure that it hasn't already gone off and I've turned it off and forgotten that I've turned it off. And it's so difficult to explain that to someone, because if you don't see ADHD as a disability, if you don't see it as a fundamental difference of the way that someone's brain works, that's not something you're necessarily going to understand or really consider, right? Because you're just thinking, well, they're doing this by choice. I'm not intentionally doing these things. People aren't intentionally doing these things. It's just a lot harder, right? And again, the solution to that would be to just stop what you're doing immediately every single time. But that can have knock-on effects in the rest of your life. And you got to remember, with ADHD, you can have difficulty deciding what to focus on and when. You kind of need to follow the whims of your body when it comes to focus a lot of the time. So yes, it can be really difficult to pull yourself out of something that you're really engrossed in, whether it's work or something that's leisure, to go and do something else. You might be like, okay, just a couple more minutes and then I'll pull myself out, and you've already forgotten. Or the alarm goes off and you're like, I know I really need to stop this, but I'm really finding it difficult to stop. In the same way that it can be difficult to get out of bed, it's not just starting a task that can be difficult, it's stopping a task. It's almost like a momentum thing, right? With ADHD, you can build up momentum for a task, and once that momentum is there, changing the direction or stopping altogether can be incredibly difficult, right? It's not just an easy thing, and I get it. When you can't see this, it just looks like choices someone is making. It looks like someone is just being lazy or disrespectful, but that isn't it. I can promise you that's not it. Like, you just need to look at this with some compassion. So yeah, an alarm isn't necessarily going to work, because you need to remember to turn the alarm on, you need to remember to turn the alarm off, you need to remember what the alarm is actually for, you need to be able to switch your focus from the thing that you're doing to another thing when the alarm goes off, and as well, you need to be able to gauge how long it's going to take for you to do the thing and set an alarm at the correct time. It is so much just to get somewhere on time, and if it's something that doesn't matter too much, or if it's something where, your employer can make it slightly easier for you, Why wouldn't you do that? Why are we expecting people with ADHD to bear the entire burden of their disability without any accommodations around them just because the presentation of it seems like someone who doesn't care? And again, I'm not saying that people with ADHD shouldn't try. What I'm saying is that we are trying. We're trying really, really hard. And for some people, it doesn't matter how hard they try, it's not going to be possible for them to be on time all the time. And that's the kind of thing that people are looking for when it comes to accommodations, right? People aren't saying, hey, look, I want accommodations so I don't need to try at all. So that you need to bear the entire burden of my lateness because I just can't be bothered. That's not what it is at all. What someone is saying is, hey, look, I am constantly fighting to try and do this. And if there's any way we can make this easier, it would have a benefit not just for me, but probably for everyone around me. Because I'm going to be less stressed, less exhausted. I'm going to be able to put my focus on other things, spend my time more efficiently doing other things. To be honest, you're probably going to get better work out of someone with ADHD if you're not expecting them to show up at the exact same time every single day. And another part of this is that people don't really understand what accommodations for this could look like. They just think it's, well, be okay with someone showing up late even if it inconveniences others. But that's not really it. And I think it's far easier to understand this when you look at it from the perspective of someone who has ADHD, right? So every single day, 5 days, that's 5 days a week, you need to be somewhere on time. And that's going to take a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And as I said, people with ADHD already have to expend a lot more energy and a lot more thought and a lot more effort to do some pretty basic tasks. And so that builds up, right? So by the end of the week, you're probably exhausted, not really able to do much outside of work. So one accommodation could be basically trying to lower that amount of stress that you've got to deal with. Just a little bit of leeway. Let's say you work in an office, right? Not expecting someone to show up on time every single day, giving them maybe 1 or 2 days a week where they can show up maybe 15 minutes later, 30 minutes later, and it's kind of all right. They just need to maybe call ahead and say, hey, look, I'm running a little bit late. I'm really trying to be in. If there's anything I can do on the way in or whatever, just that kind of communication. And ultimately, with most office jobs, that's probably not going to be an issue unless you're in a meeting. But then again, a lot of meetings in office jobs are kind of pointless. But having that little bit of leeway, maybe once or twice a week, is probably going to have a positive effect on someone's productivity because they're not then stressing about having to be on time every single day. They don't show up late and spend the day beating themselves up for, inconveniencing everyone else and being just the worst and not managing to be on time because why can't I just be on time? It should be easy for me to be on time. None of that's there. It's like, oh, I was a little bit late and that's okay. I'll just get my job done. No worries about that sort of stuff. No exhaustion of really forcing yourself to do it every single day. Just a day where you could be like, okay, I'm a little bit late. That's okay. It's fine. I'll go in and I'll get my job done. Because ultimately, the alternative to that is if you show up on time on a day where it's really bloody difficult for you to get there on time, you're going to do worse work throughout the day probably because just doing that one thing is exhausting. And that's what people don't seem to understand, that this is a disability. It's not just the same as you, someone who doesn't have ADHD, showing up a bit late because, you lost track of time and, you couldn't be bothered getting out of bed. Because losing track of time is something that happens all the time with ADHD. It's a constant effort to try to not lose track of time. It's a constant effort to try and do things like getting out of bed, like getting dressed. All of these things take a lot more energy than they might for the average person. And so expending that extra amount of energy is going to result in you being more exhausted and probably doing a worse job at work. And also what I mentioned earlier about shift work, just having overlapping shifts so that someone can be a little late without really affecting whether someone needs to go home or not. And yes, the business maybe needs to pay a little bit more there, but ultimately that's probably fine. I'm pretty sure most businesses can afford to pay a half hour extra for, every time an ADHD worker is going to come in, if it means that worker is probably going to be more productive. And ultimately, they're taking a lot of money and not giving it to the people that work there anyway, so I don't think it's a bad thing that workers get just a tiny smidge more money than they're already getting. Another accommodation could be reminders. So let's say you've got a deadline. As I mentioned earlier, 2 weeks can feel like a long, long time, and you might not even really get that the deadline is coming up until it's tomorrow. So just consistent reminders of, you've got this length of time before the deadline. Hey, you've got this length of time before the deadline, maybe weekly reminders and then reminders a few days before, like, hey, this is coming up. Just want to make sure that you're on top of it. Let me know what your progress is. That could probably help, right? Like smaller deadlines, break things down. Hey, this is a reminder, just want to check on your progress. Where are you at on this? We said you'd maybe be sort of 10% of the way through it. You think you're 10% of the way through it? Awesome, yes. And you could say, oh, well, that's taking more work from the employer. Your manager's having to do more work. Your manager's having to do their job. Their job is to manage their workers. And if their worker has a disability, then it's their job to work with that employee to, work with the disability. I don't think it's too much to ask, to give someone with ADHD smaller deadlines, to break them down into weekly things rather than just saying, okay, get this back to me in a month, right? There are things like that you can do that don't take that huge amount of effort, but make it so much easier for the worker and so much easier for everyone else that has to work with them. Another accommodation is the possibility for remote work, right? Like my old office job, we were always talking about, oh, remote work, it's great. Oh, we love remote work. Yes. And sometimes, people would take, oh, I'm going to have a work from home day today, sort of the management level. And they were saying, oh, well, we want you to have that too. And so one day I called up my line manager. I was like, hey, look, I just realized that I've woken up very late. I'm not going to be in. I probably won't be able to get in until 10 a.m. Could I just take this as a work from home day so I could get started and work on time? And my line manager was like, yeah, go ahead. And then I got a call from her manager, maybe about 30 minutes to an hour later being like, where are you? Get in. When I said, I want us to have work from home days and it's okay for us to work from home every now and then, I did not mean it. So get in. And bear in mind, this is the kind of person that would go out, get drunk, then take a work from home day the next day and do very little. This is the kind of culture that we're working with, right? Like, this is how a lot of places work. That there's different rules for management to, the people that are lower down, especially people that aren't getting as much money. And if you can do remote work, putting in remote work might actually help. So someone who is running late, they're like, oh, I'll just call up and see if I can do a remote work day today. And if that's possible and it doesn't, clash with anyone else, then there you go. That's it. These are the kind of accommodations we're talking about. It's not just putting it on someone else to make their lives difficult where yours is easier. It's just having that understanding so you can plan ahead. So if someone's late, you're aware, okay, maybe we don't schedule meetings at bang on 9 a.m. We have them at 9:15, 9:30. That way, if this person is late, then we don't need to worry too much about them missing that meeting, right? That's not a huge thing to do. It's not going to hugely impact everyone else. What it's going to do is make it so that if this person's disability is getting in the way of their life, it's getting in the way of their job, then we've got accommodations for it, right? We've got it so that it doesn't affect them as much and doesn't affect the people around them as much. And if you're getting pissed off that you have to put in maybe a little bit more effort or do something a little bit differently to accommodate someone with a disability, really think about that. Like, really think about what you're doing there, because that is kind of obscene, right? It's kind of insane to me that someone would be like, oh, well, I get that you've got a disability, but when it inconveniences me, that is not okay and you don't deserve anything. You just need to work harder. Would you see an ambulatory wheelchair user and say, you shouldn't really be using your wheelchair today because it's inconvenient to me? You shouldn't do that. That's not something that you should do. And that's a pretty easy thing to understand. And bear in mind, I'm not saying that people don't do that to ambulatory wheelchair users. I'm very sure they do. But this is something that makes it much easier for other people to understand because it's a much more visual thing, right? People tend to understand disabilities better when they're able to see them. And I feel like it's a very similar thing here. Yes, someone who is in a wheelchair but sometimes able to walk may walk sometimes and may sometimes use their wheelchair, depending on their ability that day, depending on their energy levels, depending on the pain that they're in. And it's a similar thing with ADHD. Sometimes you may be able to be on time. Other times that may be really difficult, and so it would really help if the people that are around you could just be aware of that. They could think, well, they're going to show up a little bit late, we should maybe think ahead about that, and it's not them doing it on purpose, it's just a really difficult thing for them to be on time today, because they have a disability, right? That is the key thing here, that ADHD is a bloody disability. Treat it like one. Please just treat it like one. People aren't choosing to be late because they don't care. It's not about a lack of respect. It's about the energy that you need to put in to do this otherwise normal task, which is pretty much what a disability is, right? It is more difficult for you to do something that is pretty bloody easy, but to everyone else. That's a disability. What you're doing is getting mad and being mean to people who are saying, hey, I have a disability. Can you maybe respect that I've got a disability and act like I've got a disability rather than expecting me to just, deal with the difficulties of this disability as though I don't have a disability. That's what you're asking people to do. Be disabled, don't look disabled. Be disabled, don't act disabled. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Otherwise, they wouldn't be disabled, you see. That's the key there. The disability thing is that it's not a choice. You can't just choose to not be disabled. You have to live with it every single day. And it might be a little bit easier for everyone if, the people that don't have the disability, that are working with someone who has a disability, could just bear that in mind and, give them a little bit of leeway here and there. Okay, that's the video. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to check out those t-shirts that I mentioned. Goodbye. And a very special thank you to Jasmine Barbosa, Patrice Kelly, Prince of Horror, Maul, Ataraxia25, Deadly Melody, Danito, and Brad the Music Duck.